do good work against it, and Zacian struggles to hit the majority of them for really decent damage. It can get good damage onto the Venusaur, but if the sun's in effect, it has to watch out for those max quakes that it can throw out, and especially if it's supported by something like that common life orb item that we do see on things like Venusaur. It does have to be a little bit wary about that. The sun in this match, there isn't anything to kind of counteract that except the Rotom Heat on Guillermo's team, which you feel will be quite pivotal going into this one. So it'll be interesting to see how he utilizes that. And he is, I know from past events that he's played in, and he's a very good user of Rotom. So it'll be nice to see if he does utilize this going into that match, which feels like a really key Pokemon for him.
Yeah, there's so many different modes that can be utilized there by Francesco. You can obviously go really strong on the sun, but with Venusaur, maybe try and put some of the opposing Pokemon to sleep. But then you also have access to your Charizard and can deal some really heavy hits with something like that G-Max Wildfire, get that residual damage going as well. And particularly if it is something like a Solar Power variant in the Sunshine, the damage is catastrophic. It is amazing. So it's going to be interesting to see how these players are going to be able to pivot around. And I think ball positioning is going to be key. Turn 0 could very well decide the match.
Yeah, and I think that's how it is. You have to be very patient going into these best of threes, trying to get as much information in game 1 as possible. We do have open team sheets, but at the same time, we don't know the speed stats, the investment in the actual Pokemon themselves. So that's what the players are going to kind of have to be eking out and trying to work out in these first few turns of game 1. And one Pokemon I do want to just make a little mention for, because it's not something we see too often, but the Umbreon inclusion with Francesco's team, really interesting pick, and it'd be nice to see that brought, because it does give some things on Guillermo's side of the field a little bit of trouble, namely that Dragapult. It's going to find it a little bit difficult to deal with the Umbreon, especially if it's got something like Yawn, got Foul Play that can do a lot of big damage to something like that.
Yeah, I would love to see Umbreon in the action. So let's jump right into game 1 here. This is our first match of the region finals, European region here of the Players' Cup 3. And to our delight, we're going to see that Umbreon jumping out onto the field for Francesco, paired up with the Incineroar. On the opposing side of the field, though, it's going to be Rotom Heat and the Zacian straight out the bat.
Yeah, so the Zacian here is going to get that attack boost straight off the bat, and the nice thing that Francesco's done to kind of mitigate that is bring his Incineroar, so he's got that immediate Intimidate just to reset that attack boost there. The Umbreon here, is going to be threatened a little bit by the Zacian, because the Zacian known to carry things like Sacred Sword, close combat, so it does have to be a little bit wary around that. But at the same time, the Incineroar is a nice option here for Francesco to throw up maybe a fake out this turn just to stop it performing or getting a substitute up like a lot of Zacian players like to do.
Well, the fake out landing on the correct target there, the protect from the Rotom, means it was going to be immune to that anyway. And the Umbreon targeting down into that slot as well. So a great protect there from Guillermo. No damage really done, no setup done. It's pretty much a really neutral turn.
Yeah, and you think for Francesco, I think the big thing that you want to try and do now is remove that Rotom as quickly as possible, because if you can remove the Rotom from the field, then your Sun mode is a lot freer to actually perform and kind of overwhelm Guillermo as quickly as possible. But is Guillermo going to allow the Rotom to just go down? It's going to be something that he can maybe switch out, or he can support well with his Zacian here.
Oh, I like this here. Getting the Zacian set up and protected with a substitute, and also setting up the Rotom Heat with that nasty plot. So going to be boosting up the special attack 2 stages, making it a really formidable Pokemon for Francesco to have to deal with. Incineroar, however, going to target down into what was the Zacian. It's now that cheeky little substitute doll, going to be able to take the damage. It is super effective though, so of course Zacian will return to the field, but certainly taking less damage than it would have if it wasn't behind that substitute. The Umbreon is indeed running Yawn, and this is a really nice play by Francesco. Guillermo's Rotom Heat has boosted up, but it is going to be forced to switch out unless it wants to fall asleep at the end of next turn.
Yeah, really nice play from Francesco, just to make sure that if the nasty plot does get used by the Rotom, then you're at least mitigating it and forcing that switch out with the Yawn. Otherwise you stay in, it goes to sleep, and then you could have the maximum 3 turns where it's not doing anything. And as it's such an important Pokemon to Guillermo's kind of strategy in this game, you've got to really protect it. And now it's a switch that maybe Francesco can really take advantage of, because the Zacian in a difficult position now where it has substituted. It's lost a little bit of health, and it's probably in range to go down to a Flare Blitz from the Incineroar if it's left and intimidated going into this next turn.
Oh, big damage coming out into the Umbreon there from the Zacian. Going to be obviously having its defenses dropped after dealing out that big close combat. Rotom is going to stay in though, however, and goes for the Thunderbolt. So goes for the double up into the Umbreon. Guillermo just wants to remove it straight away from the field. Will allow the Rotom to fall asleep, but it looks like the trade-off is what Guillermo really wanted to do here. Zacian, unfortunately, will be KO'd due to the super effective Flare Blitz, but I think having that double up and removing that Pokemon that can go for those yawns, that can be disruptive. You know, it's such a bulky Pokemon. If you allow it to stay on the field and it keeps going for things like Yawn and Snarl and then Moonlighting up to regain its HP, it can be a really troublesome Pokemon to deal with. So Guillermo just wanted to get rid of that as quickly as possible.
Yeah, like you said, Umbreon's one of those Pokemon, it's so well built defensively. It's one of those Pokemon that you really want to take advantage of getting rid of as soon as possible, especially because it does free up a little bit of room for your Dragapult that has just hit the field. Now, the Rotom, the sacrifice for getting rid of that Rotom is obviously your Rotom is boosted up, but it is now asleep after that Yawn, which is not ideal because you can't really make the most out of it. So you're relying heavily quite a lot on the Dragapult and hopefully getting maybe a 1 to 2 turn wake up so you can utilize the Rotom later on in this match. But I think if you're Francesco now, you really, like we've been saying, try and really concentrate on that slot, because once the Rotom goes down, the Sun mode of the team has a lot freer time to kind of operate.
Well, it's going to be a switch here for Guillermo. The Dragapult's getting in out of the action, and Rillaboom is going to join the field and spread the grassy terrain out here onto the battlefield. Francesco maybe going for his own switch, maybe wants to bring in the ground like you said, and exactly, Incineroar is going to return to the Pokeball, bring the Sun to the battlefield, and this allows the Venusaur to have its speed double thanks to its chlorophyll ability that activates when the sun is shining in the sky. It can now go for a super speedy sleep powder. If that was going into something like the Dragapult, switching in the Rillaboom here was fantastic by Guillermo. Rotom still going to take a little turn of sleep though, but I think really good pivoting from both trainers here.
Yeah, the switch to Rillaboom is a really nice one. Now you've got access to Fake Out and potentially either target to prevent either a Sleep Powder again on the Venusaur or onto the Groudon just to stop it actually attacking this turn. The Rotom though getting ever closer to waking up, and that's the point that Guillermo's trying to get to. You know, when that Rotom wakes up, you can Dynamax it and really take advantage of the ability to just hit everything on the field with the Sun Up now from the Groudon. It's super effective damage. You know, the Venusaur is a great Pokemon, but it's not really going to want to pair up against the Rotom, so that's the target. You've got to try and make the best use of maybe Groudon here with something like Rock Slide or, you know, Max Rockfall if you want to decide to max it, but you've got to be careful around the Rillaboom that's on the field that can hit you pretty hard with those grass boosted grass moves.
Yeah, that's why I like the Incineroar coming in here. Again, a really nice pivot there from Francesco, just throwing down an Intimidate against that Rillaboom that threatens the Groudon. But Lee, we are going to see our very first Dynamax here of the match in Game 1, and it is going to be that Groudon. So Francesco maybe wanting to be in a position where, you know, he's able to fire out some really powerful Max Rockfalls, like you said, to try and remove this Rotom. Because remember, it does still have its +2 special attack boost, and that's something that Guillermo is going to be hoping he's going to be able to utilize as long as that Rotom is able to wake up. And it's going to be a Dynamax apiece as Guillermo is going to go and Dynamax up that Rotom, crossing his fingers that it wakes up.
It's a very risky turn here from Guillermo. You know, it's still asleep. If it stays asleep, you waste a turn of your Dynamax. But if you get the payoff here and it wakes up, then the reward is huge. You're going to have the Rillaboom protecting just to mitigate any possible damage from the Groudon if it goes for a Fire Punch or something like that. But the Groudon going for a huge Max Rockfall into the Rotom and getting some big damage and taking away the Sun, which is one of the things that Rotom was really kind of relying on to take advantage of these boosts that you've already talked about, Lou.
Yeah, I really like that play there, being able to, like you say, override the weather, but Rotom's got something to say about it and will reset that Sun up into the sky. Goes into the Incineroar, however, that's going to be able to take that really well. Does reset the Sun, so we're going to see no residual chip damage from the sand at the end of this turn. But I think the critical thing to notice there was the Groudon, it went first. It's able to go for that Max Rockfall that will pick up the KO against that Rotom if it is allowed to connect once more.
Yeah, that's the big thing here, the speed tiers and the information that the players have gathered. The Groudon in a great position, you know, it's not really threatened by the Rillaboom being able to knock it out, especially with the Intimidate from the Incineroar from Francesco's side of the field. He's really kind of positioned himself pretty well, and that speed to be able to outspeed the Rotom Heat is pivotal in this situation. If it was the roles reversed, you know, the Groudon would be in a terrible position. But that isn't the situation we're in. There is a Dragapult in the back for Guillermo, but he does have Rillaboom that he can take advantage of. But again, with the Sun Up on on the field. Everything on Francesco's side of the field really threatening that Rillaboom with big potential fire type attacks.
I mean, wise play here from the Rotom, just protecting from another one of those max rock falls. Rillaboom, however, going to connect down into the Groudon, does a huge chunk of damage, obviously boosted up by the grassy terrain as well. And the Incineroar is able to go for the U-turn into the Rillaboom. So Francesco just making sure to pivot out here. Maybe wants to bring that Venusaur back in, thinking, no, if Guillermo's going to stick with the Sun Up, I'm going to bring in my Pokemon that's going to be able to benefit from that. And maybe we're going to see some action coming out from this Venusaur.
Yeah, and the Venusaur switch in here is really nice because you're kind of checking the Rillaboom now with a potential Sludge Bomb, so it's not really that much of an issue. Obviously, you've got to worry about Grassy Glide, but then you still have the potential now with your Groudon to actually go for that max Rockfall into the Rotom, pick up a knockout, and kind of clear Guillermo's side of the field now. So Francesco in a really dominant position. Whether Guillermo wants to switch out here, preserve the Rotom, because it's still a very important Pokemon, I think, for later on in this game, especially if the sun disappears or the Venusaur hasn't got access to that the chlorophyll ability anymore. And as we are seeing, Guillermo is switching the Rotom out, preserving it for later on in this match.
Yeah, I think having access to that Rotom to deal with the Venusaur a little bit later on can be critical, and Dragapult is going to join the action here. Rillaboom, however, just going to go straight for that Protect. Like you said, doesn't want to take a potential Sludge Bomb from this Venusaur. It is not sitting at the most healthy of health. The Sludge Bomb, however, is going to target down into that Dragapult, catches it on the switch in, does a decent amount of chip damage to it, as Groudon is able to go for its third turn of Dynamax into another one of those max Rock Falls, and it's going to be able to pick up a KO on that Dragapult with the double up. Of course, this is going to reset the weather as well, and we're going to see that chip sand damage chipping away at these Pokemon. The residual effects here can sometimes stack up, and it's an interesting scenario when you've got the sand on the field chipping away, and then you've got the grassy terrain as well regaining the health, but that chip taking away health happens first.
Yeah, that's the thing, and the only Pokemon not benefiting from the grassy terrain is going to be the Rotom when it hits the field again. I think Francesco's done a phenomenal job of kind of commanding the board here with his Groudon and Venusaur in a position now where the Groudon is going to finish its Dynamax turns, but it's going to have access to Rock Slide, and the Rotom probably in range to pick the knockup out. So it is very difficult. Will a Grassy Glide be enough to get the Groudon? I don't know. I don't think it will be, potentially. And the Venusaur in a prime position now to get that Sludge Bomb onto the Rillaboom. So it's a difficult slot, position for Guillermo to kind of come back from this one. But we're actually seeing Groudon switch out for Incineroar.
Yeah, Groudon switching out here, maybe so that the Sun can come back to help Venusaur out when the Rotom potentially isn't as much of a problem. And I think throwing down another Intimidate against that Rillaboom does just help out Francesco kind of ease a little bit about worrying about the damage that Rillaboom can do to the Groudon. But Rillaboom just going to be going straight for a Protect here. Venusaur, however, is going to be going straight forward with a Weather Ball into that Rotom, and with the sand as well, that is going to be dealing super effective damage. Oh my goodness, Rotom is away from the field. That is a sigh of relief there for Francesco.
Wow, what a play there. The Weather Ball coming out. Not the most commonly used attack on Venusaur, but really utilizing the sand that's active on the field now. That sand stream, the Weather Ball turns into a rock type attack and being super effective on the fire type, and that Rotom is really just cut short this match here and makes it nearly impossible with the fake out present from the Incineroar, and then a Sludge Bomb from the Venusaur going to be able to make easy work of the Rillaboom. And the Groudon switch there was a nice one because, as you say, you get the Intimidate support further to make sure that the Rillaboom's not so much of a threat if it does come down to that Groudon late game. So just being very cautious in that respect.
Yeah, and I really like the way that Francesco is able to pivot around his Pokemon there, being able to utilize the weather really well, whether it was getting the sun up to help the Venusaur or, getting the sand up to help the Venusaur. Not a phrase I ever really thought I was going to be able to say, but it's nice to see the versatility in the team that, Dynamax enables trainers to be able to do. And I think the other key strategy was making sure that you had your Incineroar there, either healthy in the back or ready to jump out into the action so that it can go for that Intimidate and weaken the sort of physical attacker in the form of that Rillaboom that certainly was applying a little bit of pressure to the Groudon.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you say, the way that Francesco utilized the Incineroar in particular was very good, and made it very difficult for Guillermo to get any sort of momentum on the field. And going back to one of those first few turns that we saw, the Umbreon, although it went down quite quickly in that first game there, it was so pivotal and just giving Francesco the room to kind of get that board position set up so he was able to kind of attack the Rotom, because I think he knew that was the one Pokemon once the Zacian had fallen that was going to be the thing to get rid of as soon as possible. And he did that beautifully. I mean, Guillermo got quite lucky with an early wake up with the Rotom, but Dynamaxed it at the perfect time as well, you know. But I think the speed tiers there are something that Guillermo's going to have to really consider going into this next match, because you can't approach it like you have done, thinking that, well, Rotom probably outspeeds the Groudon, don't need to worry about the Venusaur too much either. But the kind of the roles have flipped there, and the Groudon kind of dominating and shown why it was such a good restricted choice there, and especially with the support and cast that Francesco kind of brought to the match as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I did really like the way Rotom did manage to come to the action and get up. You know, it's nasty plot. It suddenly makes itself a formidable threat. But being able to be put to sleep kind of just slowed its heals a little bit. Wasn't able to kind of utilize that damage potential. And I think, like you said, Lee, the speed tiers there really were critical. That Groudon outspeeding just made things really, really difficult for Guillermo. But now that they've got a little bit more knowledge about how the Pokemon have been trained, let's jump into game 2 and see how they're going to be able to adapt. Francesco, as you know, is 1-0 in this set of 3. Let's see who's going to be taking game 2. It's going to be a lead of that Umbreon and Incineroar out there for Francesco, whereas Guillermo has opted for Rotom and has changed it up with a Grimmsnarl on the field.
Yeah, so the Grimmsnarl's a nice kind of bring here, because the Zacian really didn't perform too much in that first game. You know, it did get help in getting rid of the Umbreon, which was such a big kind of thorn in his side with those yawns. But with the Grimmsnarl here, you can kind of prolong the longevity of your own Pokemon with potential screens here. You've also got access to maybe Fake Out as well to disrupt the Pokemon on Francesco's side of the field.
Well, Grimmsnarl is just going to get in on out of there straight away, but it's good information to know that it is in the back to cause some disruption later on. Guillermo just going to bring that Zacian straight onto the field, and with Incineroar already in play, it cannot throw down and Intimidate against it, so Zacian will be able to get its +1 boost from its ability. Rotom is going to be going for the Protect, and Incineroar actually going for the U-turn here, so as smart as it was for Guillermo getting that Zacian here without having to take the Intimidate. Intimidate's now waiting in the back, and it does allow Francesco the opportunity to now switch up his ball position a little bit as well.
Yeah, really nice play there, you know, to kind of mitigate if the Zacian does come in there. You're thinking straight away that Guillermo's got a really nice switch here into the Zacian, because what's likely to come out is something like a Fake Out. So getting it in and kind of getting your attack boost is great, but then keeping the Incineroar on the back if you're Francesco is also important against any Zacian, because you need it to really mitigate the attack boost that it can freely get anytime it comes in and out of the battlefield.
And I mean, depending on what Francesco has in the back here, you know, it gives them a couple of options. You can always go for bringing in that Groudon. You know, the Sun will then boost up the Venusaur's speed, and that's where you can start threatening again with some of those sleep powders. But it's actually going to be the Venusaur leaving the field, and Incineroar is returning once again. You know, Venusaur just making a kind of guest appearance, and Intimidate being thrown down to bring that Zacian right back down to neutral, just so things like the close combat are not going to be able to deal as much damage to something like the Umbreon, or even the Incineroar that's just switched in. And a little earlier in game 2 than in game 1, we're going to see a Dynamax, Lee.
Yeah, it is going to be the Rotom, and you think they're probably going to go heavy down on Francesco's Umbreon again, but the problem is this time is there's not going to be really the return, because the Incineroar was forced in from Francesco, whereas before it was kind of active on the field and was able to pick up the knockout onto the Zacian and get some return for losing Umbreon after getting a yawn, but neither being able to get that off this turn as a close combat coming in and doing huge damage there.
Yeah, the close combat really going into the Umbreon there, of course, lowering the defenses of that Zacian as well. It's going to be a little bit vulnerable going forward. The Max Flare coming out, though, from that Rotom connecting into the Umbreon, and it looks like it is enough to pick up the KO. So once again, Guillermo is going to be able to remove the Umbreon from play, a Pokemon that has the potential to be so disruptive with those yawns. So I'm sure Rotom will be happier that it can't be put to sleep in this game as it stands.
Yeah, I mean, the Umbreon not able to get the yawn off, which was so kind of disruptive to Guillermo in game 1, is a huge play, and just by kind of baiting with the Grimmsnarl in that first turn, leading out with it, and then getting your Zacian onto the field, really disrupted what Francesco was able to do, having to get the Incineroar out, having to get it back in again, and kind of leaving the Umbreon in a very vulnerable spot, which we've seen there. There's no return on getting that Umbreon knocked out for Francesco like there was in game 1. So Guillermo taking an early lead here, and he's already got the the Rotom maxed, and it will start doing some big damage to the Groudon. Does have to be careful though, of course, because the Groudon we know is faster than it. But if you max right now in front of Zacian, are you going to be able to take a Max Flare and a Behemoth Blade that obviously is, you know, doubled in attack against Dynamax Pokemon? So you've got to be a bit careful as well if you're Francesco. Maybe get the Incineroar out of here to bring back in again might be useful, especially against the Zacian. But again, if you're doing that, you've only got the Venusaur on the back, so it's quite an easy switch to kind of pick up on.
Well, the Zacian is going to return to its Pokeball, and the Grimmsnarl is going to rejoin the field here. Zacian maybe just wanting to reset the kind of drop that it got from its ability. It wants to be able to get its +1 attack back in the action later on. Maybe try and go for those Behemoth Blades into the Dynamax on Francesco's side, which is going to be that Groudon once again. And this is where things get interesting for this Rotom. We know that the Groudon's able to outspeed it, so Rotom really only has opportunity to go for one big Dynamax move. And whether it wants to utilize the Sun, or maybe set up something like the Electric Terrain to stop any Sleep Powders coming out from the Venusaur later on, we will find out. Grimmsnarl not going to go for anything though, as it takes the Fake Out there from the Incineroar. And once again, it's going to be the Max Rockfall connecting into the Rotom from the Groudon. We know that it does over 50% damage, huge devastation. It's a good thing that Rotom is Dynamaxed and gets double its HP, but Rotom is going to be in a position where it can fire off a Max Flare, targeting down into that Groudon. Does a decent amount of chip damage there, so probably about a fifth of damage going, and the weather, of course, will be reset to the sunshine.
Yeah, the weather back up now makes it difficult. The Groudon is in a position like in that first game where it can go for Max Rockfall. The difference here is if that Grimmsnarl has the screen support, it can throw up a Reflect, and that makes it a little bit more tricky because you're not then going to get the knockout with the Max Rockfall. And in return, you're still going to take maybe another Max Flare and end up with the Sun Up on the field, which could fall into Guillermo's hands as an advantage, but it could also really benefit Francesco here as well. We know that he's got the Venusaur on the back, so if you're wanting to keep weather control, you want that Sun Up for when the Venusaur comes in the late game and potentially can disrupt with Sleep Powders and that Chlorophyll ability, etc.
Well, it really does make Venusaur such a formidable threat that's able to utilize the weather, and it's going to be interesting to see which one it's going to come back into the field and what the environment's going to be. Grimmsnarl going for that Reflect though. Again, it does like to set up these defensive strategies like Reflect and Light Screen, often holding that Light Clay to be able to boost them for 8 turns, giving extra longevity to Guillermo's side. And the Rotom capitalizing on the fact that there has been a Max Guard from that opposing Groudon, it's able to set the Electric Terrain, doing a decent chunk of damage to that opposing Incineroar. But I think critically, having the Electric Terrain on the field does stop any Pokemon being put to sleep that are grounded. Either that or, you know, Pokemon wearing safety goggles, they can obviously avoid those powder-based moves like Sleep Powder. But looks like it's going to be a little change up from Francesco's side of the field.
Yeah, preserving that Incineroar, and I think it's got to be something you've got to keep in the back of your mind. You know, the Zacian is in the back for Guillermo, so you've got to try and get that Incineroar out at some point to bring in when the Zacian finally does hit the field again. The Venusaur in now, taking advantage of the sun, and going to be able to throw out some big attacks here. And the Groudon, the beauty about the Groudon here is it can actually get rid of the sun, get the Sandstream up, and then take advantage of that Weather Ball again. And you've got two ends of the spectrum. You've got the physical end of the spectrum and then the special end of the spectrum from the Venusaur there. And Rotom's so low health at the minute, it probably will go down to that. But you've got to worry, you know, we've only seen 3 Pokemon from Guillermo at this point. What's the 4th Pokemon? Is he got a really good switch into those attacks potentially and kind of eat up the last turn of this Groudon's Dynamax? Because it's quite pivotal. Or do you go down a route where you maybe go from Max Quake into the Grimmsnarl slot and try and get some special defense boost to kind of help you a little bit more against something like the Rotom?
Well, it is a critical turn, and that Rotom is going to go for the Protect here. Grimmsnarl going to go for the Light Screen there, so boosting up on the special defense side of things as well, and that's defense and special defense now boosted up on Guillermo's side. The Weather Ball is going to be at using the Sun and targeting down into that opposing Grimmsnarl, but you can see the Light Screen really paying off here. Really doesn't take too much damage at all, but on the physical side, it's going to be the Max Rockfall from the Groudon, so a really wise Protect here from the Rotom, going to be able to take that, you know, through Protect, and also having the Reflect up on screen as well is going to be helping that Rotom and its longevity.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice play there from Francesco. You kind of cover, if the Rotom doesn't protect here, you kind of probably do pick up the knockout because it's not Dynamaxed anymore. But at the same time, even if it does protect, it's that little bit of extra damage that you're getting onto it. And the chip damage, obviously, with the Sandstorm, which doesn't seem to be affecting the Rotom, which gives away what its item is, obviously making things a bit more difficult for the Venusaur to hit it with the sleep powder with those safety goggles. But at the same time, any damage onto the Rotom is very useful here because it's probably close to being knocked out by a Rock Slide from the Groudon right now. So it has to be a little bit careful there. But do you switch in the Zacian here? Because the Zacian coming in would take attacks from both the Venusaur and the Groudon pretty well at this point.
Yeah, that's the thing. The sun's not on the field, so Zacian can feel a little bit safer at this point. It's going to be able to come in, use its Intrepid Sword ability, and get its attack stat raised up. And this is where things can get interesting. It can give Guillermo the more physical pressure that he needs. Taunt coming out, though, from that Grimmsnarl, going to be stopping the Groudon from potentially going for any protects later on. Weather Ball is going to be utilized once again by that Venusaur, hoping to have target down into the Rotom and pick up a KO, but Zacian able to take that much, much better.
Yeah, that's the nicest switch there from Guillermo, just to be able to get the Zacian in almost for free here, because now it does pressure both the Groudon and the Venusaur pretty heavily. And to really utilize the Venusaur, you kind of need the sun to be up, but to utilize the Weather Ball in a way to deal with the Rotom Heat, you kind of need the sand up like we're seeing at the moment. The Rotom Heat safe in the back for the moment, and everything on Francesco's side of the field. Got to worry about that Zacian, but it has just reverted out straight away.
Yeah, Rotom, being not on the ground is going to be able to dodge out of the way of any potential Precipice Blades. And I also really like the taunt coming in from that Grimmsnarl. Again, it's open team list. He's going to know that Sword Stance is on that opposing Groudon, and it was a pretty open Sword Stance to go for when you're down against the Grimmsnarl and the Rotom. So being able to stop the, massive attack boost that Groudon was going to get was really well played there from Guillermo. It is going to be that Precipice Blades. Rotom going to not mind that at all, and looks like Grimmsnarl's not going to mind either, able to avoid the attack. Spirit Break going to come out, connect into the Groudon for a little bit of chip damage. Will lower the special attack, but Groudon's not going to mind that too much. With a little bit of chip damage, as we know, Lee, can always add up.
Yeah, always adding up there, and I think it's quite pivotal now that if you're Francesco, you're kind of in that situation again where you want to get the Incineroar off the field, because Guillermo's playing this Zacian fantastically this game. He's really making sure that, anytime he puts it on the field, knowing that the Incineroar's coming on the field, he's reacting to that, taking it out. So Francesco has to try and keep up and do the same. I think Rock Slide here with the Groudon is a nice play, but you've got to be wary about the Zacian coming back in again if you are Francesco.
Yeah, well, Rock Slide does manage to find its mark, and even though both these Pokemon are at low HP, it only gets the 1 KO on the Rotom. Grimmsnarl is able to hang on. Incineroar is going to go for the side damage there to be able to activate the berry on Groudon. Fantastic calculations there by Francesco, knowing that it was the perfect amount needed to allow the Groudon to be able to regain that critical HP. And of course, it allows Francesco once again to go for that pivot, the U-turn in, on, out of there. You can bring Venusaur back into the field, and it does just allow that Intimidate to be safe in the back for Francesco.
Yeah, it's a really nice play there, just in case there was a Protect maybe coming out from the Grimmsnarl and you weren't able to get the U-turn off there. Going for it into the Groudon makes a lot of sense as well. So you activate that Citrus Berry just to prolong the lifespan of Groudon almost, giving it that extra HP back is so pivotal, and at the same time keeping your Incineroar on the back. So it's really, really imperative that Francesco keeps up with how Guillermo's utilizing the Zacian. We are going to see the final Pokemon here hit the field, and it is going to be that Rillaboom.
Yeah, finally revealed here from Guillermo. Amazing to have kept it sort of hidden until this point, and the grassy terrain is going to be coming into effect. This is where Groudon has to worry a little bit. One of those powerful grass type moves going down into the Groudon will be able to do a huge chunk of damage in the grassy terrain.
Yeah, and you really want to be utilizing the Incineroar here, and it's kind of making it very difficult because you want to keep the Incineroar in the back until the Zacian comes onto the field, but at the same time, Groudon in an awful spot now where the Grassy Glides, Wood Hammers, boosted by that grassy terrain from the Rillaboom, are really threatening the Groudon. So you've got to really maybe make a decision here. Do you switch the Groudon out, get the Incineroar in, and then have to think about pivoting it out again if the Zacian doesn't come out? But not seeing that, just seeing the Groudon go for a little old Protect here.
Yeah, just playing a little bit defensively, maybe just going for that Protect to scout out what's going on. And the Rillaboom going down into the Venusaur with the Fake out there. So just going to stop it from going for any big sort of damage here, maybe even going for something like a Sleep Powder to try and put the Zacian asleep. But I think it's also a nice protective measure, stalling out that weather. So Weather Ball can no longer get up to too many tricks.
No, it won't be able to hit the Rotom any longer. The one thing that you do have for Francesco is to switch the Groudon out now to get the Sun back in later to support that Venusaur, of course, because the Venusaur will be the fastest thing on the field as long as that Sun is active, but you've got to get the Groudon out of here, and it feels like a good point to maybe bring your Incineroar in, but at the same time doing that is Guillermo going to kind of pick up on that. It's quite an easy double up here with your Rillaboom maybe Grassy gliding into that slot or Wood hammering into that slot and just going for a Behemoth Blade or a close combat as well to kind of cover potentially an Incineroar coming in, or you could play it a little bit safer, maybe switch the Zacian out again here for something like the Rotom Heat.
I was going to say, I quite like the mind games going on here because Zacian always looks to be in a bit of a precarious situation with the Groudon and Incineroar, and particularly when the Sun comes back in and Weather Ball being used on that Venusaur. Zacian's not going to appreciate that at all. So Groudon returning to its Pokeball, able to threaten the Sun a little bit later on, I think is a good play here by Francesco. And you can also utilize the Switcher and using that Intimidate, but it's going to be the Behemoth Blade, one of my absolute favorite animations in the game, targeting down into that Venusaur, and it looks like that picks up a solid KO against the Venusaur. So that is a sigh of relief there for Guillermo. Doesn't have to worry about Weather Ball, about Sludge Bomb, or about any potential sleep shenanigans coming on as well. Incineroar, you know, it doesn't mind taking grass moves, but Wood Hammer in grassy terrain still did a sizable chunk of damage, and that certainly puts it in range for the Zacian to be able to finish it up.
Yeah, it just shows how strong the Rillaboom is. It is a resisted attack onto the Incineroar, and it has got the Intimidate, but such a strong attack boosted by that grassy terrain. Taking a bit too much damage here and really in range now for Zacian to get it with close combat or an Iron Head, you know, well, close combat obviously, but the Groudon coming in here as well. Not in the greatest spot. It is going to be an easy target for Guillermo to double up into it if he wants to, but see with the Sun up as well, you can't leave the Incineroar alone. If you do, it's able to pick up a knockout on either the Zacian or Rillaboom, so it's something you've got to keep in mind as well. Potentially though, with the amount of Pokemon that Guillermo's got left in the switching that he's got to potentially the Rotom in the back with the Levitate, it is giving him probably a little bit more of an edge in this game, but you've just got to be patient. But he's been patient throughout this game so far, so it may be nice to see the Zacian switch out so you can get it back in and just take advantage of those attack boosts to kind of close this matchup and tie it up if possible.
I mean, you make an excellent point there, Lee. There's only 2 Pokemon left on Francesco's side. He doesn't have the flexibility to switch in and out. So Incineroar is going to have to take that powerful close combat coming out from the Zacian that's able to pick up the solid KO, leaving Groudon down against the remaining Pokemon on Guillermo's side of the field. It's going to be going for that Precipice Blade. It does manage to find its mark on both Pokemon. Zacian drops so fast to that powerful move. But, oh, critical hit. I mean, absolutely devastating damage at the best of times, but throwing a critical hit, it's just going to be chaos. But it does still leave Guillermo free to bring in the last Pokemon there of that Grimmsnarl, and Rillaboom sitting in a good position where it can regain that HP from the grassy terrain and is able to now apply a lot of pressure to that opposing Groudon. We know that there isn't any fire type move on that Groudon to have to contend with, so Rillaboom is, I think, sitting quite pretty at the end of this game too.
Yeah, you're kind of relying on Rock Slide really more than anything. If you are Groudon, you've got to try and get a Sword Stance up if possible. But I think the big thing if you're Francesco is to try and stall out this grassy terrain, because taking away those boosts that Rillaboom's got access to now is so imperative. It'll make life a lot easier dealing with the Rillaboom anyway if they aren't in effect. So I don't know if he's going to be able to. We are going to see a taunt here just come out from that Grimmsnarl to ensure no more Sword Stances appear here.
Yeah, no more Sword Stances, and Rock Slide isn't going to be able to connect on the critical Pokemon either of that Rillaboom, so there is absolutely no flinch chance on the Rillaboom. Grimmsnarl, however, will be KO'd, return to its Pokeball, but Rillaboom is free to go for one of those Wood Hammers in the terrain, picks up a solid KO. Phenomenal damage once again, and what an amazing, devastating Game 2 coming out here from Guillermo. It's 1 apiece, and we're going to be moving on to a Game 3, Lee.
Yeah, very exciting and so tense throughout that game, and a lot of mind games as well. We saw how patient Guillermo was with the Zacian, you know, not really leaving out on the field. Like a lot of times he was baiting in the Incineroar and doing it very beautifully, you know, and then getting the Rotom Heat, utilising that very well. And I think the way that he approached the Umbreon in that first game, kind of learned his lesson from game 1. He was like, I don't really want to entertain the fact that I'm going to have to play around Yawn or toy with sleep turns. I want to remove that as soon as possible and almost bait waiting in the Grimmsnarl turn one, that lead that he led with to get the Zacian onto the field, then made it difficult for Francesco to kind of continually, like we saw throughout that match, play cat and mouse with it to try and get the Intimidator in the back to get in on the Zacian all the time. Made it very difficult for him, and all the time while he was doing that, Guillermo was kind of just chipping away at things, and to the point where he was able to kind of close the match up at the end game there.
Yeah, the ball positioning just kept changing the whole way through that game, but I think it was really well played by both of our players. You know, the Incineroar constantly switching out at the right time to make sure that Intimidate was always there and preserved and ready to help on Francesco's side of the field, and I absolutely loved that side U-turn as well, not only enabling the Incineroar to be in the back to be able to switch in later, but proccing the berry as well, you know, being a helpful Pokemon buddy to its partner Groudon. But I think as well, you mentioned a good point there, Lee, about the Zacian just being able to, you know, not get KO'd as early as it did in game one. It was there, like you say, as kind of a little bit of bait, a little bit of temptation for Francesco to try and go into and KO, and also being able to provide nice relief for that Rotom. It was able to take those rock type attacks, and particularly the Weather Ball, much better than the Rotom would have. It just allowed Guillermo that little bit of flexibility to keep moving around his Pokemon and ultimately be able to take game two.
Yeah, that's it. And I think like Francesco has probably learned a lot from that game as well, and maybe what his best kind of strategy would be going into game three. I think if you're leading something like maybe Incineroar and Groudon here, it kind of lets you cover a lot of bases and prevents that sort of play. Whereas you could, if you wanted to bring the Umbreon, and I know you like it as a disruptive kind of Pokemon to bring with that Yawn and the other options that it's got there, but if you keep it for a late game Pokemon, it might provide a little bit better support. You've got to be a little bit careful against the Rotom, of course, but I think with that lead, it makes things a little bit more awkward. But Guillermo's not locked to just those 4 Pokemon. He could change things up here as well.
Yeah, well, Lee, you know I love myself a game 3, so let's jump right into the Pokemon action and see which of our trainers are going to be remaining in the winner's bracket and who's going to be bumped down to the loser's bracket. But let's see, a little change up, a lot of sun coming out there on Francesco's side. It's going to be the Groudon paired up with the Charizard. It's certainly going to appreciate the weather of the sunshine being on the field against the Zacian and the Rotom heat.
Yeah, the inclusion of Charizard here is a very interesting one. You know, it instantly puts a lot of pressure, a lot more pressure onto the Zacian, not so much importance onto the Intimidate here, but at the same time, the Rotom lead from Guillermo, we've been saying it throughout, it's like the running theme here is the Rotom puts so much pressure onto that Charizard, especially if we see it go for that Dynamax this turn and get a big attack onto the Charizard here like a Max Lightning. And also it's got the option to go after the Groudon as well, you know, it doesn't need to just chase down the Charizard. But, you know, the Zacian is going to be in a spot where it probably wants to switch out here or at least protect this turn, because the threat of potentially a Heat Wave or the Dynamax Blast Burn attack from the Charizard and Precipice Blades are probably a little bit too much to keep it on the field right now.
I mean, this is the thing, who do you target down? The Charizard gives you so many problems with things like Gorilla Boom and also your Zacian, but then at the same time, we know how much Groudon can target down the Rotom and the Zacian as well. So definitely a difficult choice here for Guillermo coming into this turn 1. Incineroar, to no surprise, is joining the field, throwing around an Intimidate just to bring that Zacian right back down to neutral. And straight away, game 3, it's always quite a dynamic one, as we're going to see our first Dynamax here straight away in turn 1 with that Groudon. So Francesco is not messing around here. Groudon is here, ready to deal out some big action. And considering the difficulties that Rotom has given him previously, could potentially be seeing a weather change up, particularly with the fact that the Charizard has left the field, doesn't need the sun, and to be honest, Rotom might even set the sun back up for Charizard later on anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing, and if the Venusaur's lurking in the back for Francesco, that also is something that he doesn't mind seeing the sun go up, if that's a potential possibility here. The Zacian is going to be very threatened by the Groudon if it decides to go for a Max Quake, but I like the lead that Guillermo's led here. You know, you have to pick a side, you have to pick either the Max Quake or you have to pick the Rockfall, and which one you pick, you kind of getting a reward on the other side of the field.
One of those coin flicks I always hate to call, but it's going to be the Max Rockfall coming down into that Rotom. We've seen it time and time again in this set, and Rotom is the target of Groudon's Wrath there. It's going to be able to bring the sand to the field as well, so we're going to see that residual chip damage. But Rotom actually saying, no, we won't, Lou. We're going to bring the sunshine right back into the action and do a little bit of damage to Groudon in retaliation. Of course, the Zacian sitting up behind its substitute as well. So Guillermo really able to kind of capitalize on this turn and protect Zacian up going into turn 2.
Yeah, and the Zacian here actually getting the substitute up is really key, because it gives kind of Guillermo like a free turn to almost get some big damage off onto the Groudon, especially if it's that Behemoth Blade. You know, it has taken the Intimidate from the Incineroar, but it's still going to be hitting pretty hard. And if you do decide to double up into the Groudon now with the Zacian and the Rotom, it looks like it could probably go down here, and the worst case scenario is you kind of maybe lose Zacian, but it's probably a good return here, because then it leaves the Rotom Heat kind of unaffected and free to kind of operate like Guillermo needs it to in this match.
Well, Zacian, being the speediest thing on the field at the moment, jumps out from the substitute to go for that powerful Behemoth Blade and is able to connect onto the Groudon. Of course, the BP of this Behemoth Blade will double when targeting down into a Dynamax Pokemon, so it deals a huge chunk of damage, enough to activate that Citrus Berry on the Groudon as well. So it's going to be able to regain a little bit of HP, and it is enough to be able to fire off a Max Quake. I was about to say Precipice Blades, but no, it's going to be Dynamaxed up. It turns into a Max move and is able to deal absolutely no damage to the Zacian thanks to the substitute, but of course is able to break it and leave that Zacian vulnerable to be targeted down by the Incineroar.
Yeah, it's a nice play here, because you're not only kind of getting rid of the substitute, but you're also bolstering your own special defense at the same time, which means that you're going to be able to easier take these big attacks from the Rotom. And, you know, with the Flare Blitz coming out from the Incineroar here, you're hoping to get a return and pick up the knockout, which you do onto the Zacian, which is such a big threat to Francesco's side of the field. So a really nice play here to kind of end that turn.
And nice to get the special defense boost up as well on Francesco's side of the field. You know, the Max Flare coming out from the Rotom is going to be sun boosted as well, and being a well-known special attacker, going to be dealing a decent chunk of damage to that Groudon. But just having that +1 special defense gives you that little bit of breathing room going forward.
Yeah, and the tables turn a little bit now, because for the, you know, the Dragapult inclusion here is going to make it difficult for the Groudon to actually get an attack off onto this Rotom potentially, because the Dragapult likely going to be able to pick up the knockout onto the Groudon. Now, do you try and pivot out here with your Incineroar, preserve your Groudon, protect it maybe, or max guard it this turn, which isn't a bad opportunity, as we do see a max guard come straight out from the Rotom Heat on Guillermo's side.
Yeah, just protecting itself up here, and the Dragapult getting in out of the action as well. Dragapult going to be able to avoid the attacks coming out from, I believe it was the Groudon first of all, and then of course the Incineroar targeting down into the Max Guard. So a very, very neutral looking turn here, but the Dragapult getting off that first turn of Phantom Force just allow Guillermo to play defensively in that particular turn.
Yeah, it's a nice play to get the Dragapult off the field, kind of out of harm's way, and now it's going to be able to come back up, potentially knock out the Groudon. You'd expect that to be the target for it here. And the Incineroar in a spot where it's really not able to threaten the Rotom for very big damage, and it's maybe an opportunity for Guillermo to get a nasty plot up. It feels like a perfect opportunity. So Francesco needs to start thinking about that, because if the nasty plot goes up and you've got the support with the Dragapult there, we only know he's got the Charizard in the back, which isn't a Pokemon that can really come in and match up well against the Rotom, especially if it is a +2 special attack.
Yeah, and Groudon will fall victim to that Phantom Force, so there's really nothing you can do against it. It's not like you can protect when the Dragapult sneakily comes in behind your Pokemon. Incineroar just going to take a little bit of damage from the Thunderbolt there, as the Incineroar's able to retaliate into that Dragapult that has appeared and does a huge chunk of damage with the Dark Lariat, but of course the Focus Sash they're going to be able to hold on.
Yeah, the Dragapult's still going to be able to stick around for another turn at least, but if the Venusaur's in the back, then this is a Pokemon that Francesco can bring in and really, you know, get the jump on the speed tiers here, because of that Chlorophyll ability with the Sun Up. Put some pressure onto the Rotom, put some pressure onto the Dragapult. It's kind of got the pick of both Pokemon to go for here, and without the light screen support that we had in the previous game from Guillermo's side with the Grimmsnarl, it makes it a little bit easier and a bit freer for the Venusaur to do a lot more damage here. So whether or not we see, it all depends on Guillermo's last Pokemon. You know, it really does come down to that. If it's the Rillaboom, then it's going to be difficult to close this out, especially with the Charizard in the back. But if you're Francesco, the main thing to do right now is get rid of that Rotom while you can, and really trying to concentrate down on that side of the field. But doing that too much can leave a little bit of room for maybe Guillermo to come back into this one.
Well, the target that Venusaur has chosen to go down into is that Dragapult, able to pick up the KO with the Weather Ball, but it is leaving itself vulnerable to something like an Overheat that does come out from the Rotom, able to connect and picks up the solid KO against the Venusaur. I know sometimes it's a bit of a gamble, Overheat, not known to be the most accurate of moves all the time. Sometimes can miss, but unfortunately for the Venusaur was able to connect. Now also trying to make use of the Sun is the Flare Blitz coming out from that Incineroar, but Rotom able to survive there on 15 HP remaining. So certainly a pretty dynamic turn there coming out, you know, a couple of KOs apiece. But it's going to be interesting to see how when the Charizard rejoins the field, how it's going to be able to cope with the Rillaboom and the Rotom on Guillermo's side.
Yeah, now the Rillaboom coming in does activate the grassy terrain. It does have access to Fake Out for at least one turn, but is that going to be enough? Because you're expecting that the Assault Vest on the Incineroar is probably enough, especially with the -2 that the Rotom's just taken from that Overheat. It feels like a bit of a stretch to say the Rotom's going to be able to deal with, you know, the threat like Charizard that it would normally quite easily deal with at a good amount of health, but because it's so low, it's going to go down to a Heat Wave easily from the Charizard. So I don't know. It depends what the Rillaboom has access to here.
Well, the Rotom's just going to go straight up for the Protect here as Rillaboom decides to go for the Wood Hammer down into that opposing Incineroar. It's not enough to pick up the KO though. Incineroar leaving on just a slither of health there. It's able to retaliate with a Darkest Lariat, but it looks like it's going straight into the Protect of that Rotom. So a great Protect there from Guillermo, making sure Rotom is able to hang around. But like you say, the HP puts it in a really precarious situation. It can of course go for something like a Thunderbolt into the Charizard, do a decent chunk of damage, but I think without being able to access that in Dynamax and turn it into a Max Lightning, Charizard's going to be able to survive.
Yeah, you would imagine so, and the Charizard probably going to be able to outspeed it as well, which is the big thing here. If it can just go for that one attack and just connect, that's all it needs to do on both Pokemon. It's pretty much wrapped up here as we see a Grassy Glide come in and be enough to take that Incineroar down. So Rillaboom making good work of the Incineroar there, you know, and Guillermo doing everything in his power to kind of control this match as best as possible. But the Charizard coming out with the Heat Wave, connecting, taking both of these Pokemon down, clinching the match for Francesco. And the Charizard in the end, Lou, the Pokemon that kind of is victorious.
Yeah, amazing seeing that Charizard come in for game 3 and actually able to take the step for Francesco. Amazing to see that Heat Wave as well connect on both the opposing Pokemon. Sometimes Heat Wave can be such a risky move again. I don't know, maybe it just only happens to me and not to these professionals here. That's why they're playing and I'm behind the desk, because they can hit the Heat Waves. But Charizard very focused there for Francesco, able to take the set, and he will remain in the winner's bracket. And, you know, commiserations to Guillermo, who will move down to the loser's bracket, but is not out of the competition by any means.
No, and like you say, Lou, you know,